Before we jump in, a quick favor. If you're finding value in Rev-n-u Unplugged, hit subscribe and leave us a review. It genuinely helps us reach more sales leaders, and I would really appreciate it. Today's guest is Craig Jones, CRO at Star Compliance, and he's done something most leaders are aiming to achieve. He grew revenue by 30 to 40%. Most new CROs walk in chasing new logos, trying to prove themselves fast. Craig did the opposite. He spent 90 days diagnosing, looking at ICP clarity, win-loss patterns, what the top reps were doing differently. You see, his view, fix the story and the target first, then worry about scale, because the biggest mistake is scaling chaos. The results speak for themselves. He cut sales stages from 9 to 5. The top of funnel conversion went from 7% to 47%, and pipeline age dropped by 30%, all whilst hitting best-in-class SaaS win rates. Today we're talking about positioning versus features, his SWOT framework for GTM resets, and his exact playbook for those critical first 90 days. Grab a brew, sit back. This is Rev-n-u Unplugged.
Craig, welcome to Rev-n-u Unplugged. It's an absolute pleasure to have you join us on the show today. Thank you for stopping by. We've got some incredible topics you've brought with us that we're going to dive into, from positioning and messaging, which I'm excited about. We haven't discussed that yet on the show. ICP and focus, and we're going to be talking about sales methodology, but importantly, execution on that methodology. And there's going to be some sales enablement in there as well. So lots to get into. I always ask, for our audience sake, if you could just give them a little background, Craig, as to who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, James, thanks for the time. I'm really excited to be here. I have been in go-to-market roles for about 25 years of my career. Started my career at Anderson Consulting, ultimately became Accenture, had a nice 10-year run there, and then spent the next 10 years with big box software companies like Workday, Oracle, and SAP. And most recently, in the last 8 years of my career, I've had the pleasure of working in private equity with some really, really fast-growing companies and some great private equity companies. And today I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Star Compliance and on my 4th year at that company.
We're going to dive straight into these topics now. Positioning and messaging. Before we talk in detail about that, why was that a topic that was at front of mind for you that you wanted to come onto the podcast today and talk about?
Yeah, James, I think that over probably the last 7 to 10 years, I have seen sales organizations primarily focus on selling to the user and ultimately selling feature function. And one of the big things that I'm a huge fan of is really selling an outcome, right? So selling the problem versus selling the product. And I really do believe that some of the biggest positioning mistakes is when you confuse what the product does with why a buyer should change. So just really, really important that this topic be brought up in a way that helps companies understand that one of the best things you can do is really drive a focus on positioning and messaging.
So people that focus on the product rather than the problem, and I think that's probably largely the problem that is out there. How should a sales leader address that problem?
Yeah, well, I think, most companies kind of position themselves as better instead of different, right? Which, basically forces sales teams to focus on comparisons and price pressure. And real positioning, I believe, answers 3 things clearly. Who is it for? What problem is urgent now, and why the status quo is no longer acceptable? And if a rep can explain why a buyer should act this quarter or this month or this day instead of next year, your positioning isn't finished, right? When companies fix this, win rates go way up and you stop stalling the ultimate indecision that we all see in no decisions.
And in what way is the messaging different if you're talking about a problem over a product?
Yeah. Well, messaging works when sales uses it without being told to. I don't look at brand surveys. I look at call recordings and deal reviews. And the question I have to ask is, are reps leading with the same problem framing Or are they handling the objections, consistently? If top reps are rewriting the pitch, then it's not a sales problem, right? It's a messaging problem and it's a messaging failure. So the best signal is when new reps kind of ramp faster because they become just fierce product learners, become experts in the product. And it really does take the heavy lifting off of the plate of selling and really providing that trust at an individual seller level.
So that's interesting. So we know messaging is working if you're getting sellers ramping up fast, business is happening. How do we know that the messaging is wrong if win rate isn't going up and it could be the rep?
Yeah, well, I think, part of that is the fastest way, and this is kind of Captain Obvious stuff, but it's something that I really think about all the time. The fastest way to improve win rates is really to narrow who you sell to, right? Most teams think about having an ICP, but they still chase the edge cases. That kills win rates, it wastes sales cycles. And when you tighten the qualification and the discovery up front by disqualifying those deals that early are based on problem fit and buying urgency, then you improve your win rate and forecast accuracy at the same time. So saying no more often frees up the ability to have a higher win rate and focusing on those right deals, because the wrong customer is not the right customer for a long-term, return on investment.
You mentioned that you don't necessarily look at brand reports and insight that way. You're listening to calls, which I think is obviously a great way of getting some insight across the board. But what are you looking for in those conversations that's going to let you know if messaging is right or not?
Great question. I think, my dad always taught me this. He was a 36-year executive at IBM, and he always said, hey, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. And so when you think about that, it really is about, showing up to a prospect and asking how you can help them, right? Versus basically saying, here's what I've got. And it's really important to learn from the customer in that discovery process, what kind of situation they're in, what kind of impact can a solution provide them? What kind of pain are they in? And I always ask 3 questions when I go into an early stage cycle. It's why do anything, why now, and why star can help. And at the end of the day, if they can articulate the situation, the pain, and the impact, then you've got a real decision maker that can help you drive the solution return on investment.
What you said there kind of fits nicely into the last thing I wanted to ask you to really focus in and tactically. When you say sell the problem, not the product, can you walk us through what that actually looks like in practice, and how that connects with positioning?
Absolutely. So, we use the term SaaS a lot. Obviously, we're in this phase of software that, the software provides a service, right? But what forward thinkers think about in today's selling environment is really outcome as a service, right? What outcomes are you trying to solve? What jobs are you trying to get done at the client to help them actually increase productivity, to drive more agility, and to drive a higher ROI? And so when I think about selling the problem, this is really around how does your platform, how does your product actually get jobs done for the customer, putting yourselves in their shoes. And then it comes down to the methodology that we talked about, whether it's situation, impact, pain, and really driving how you actually do that. Just very, very important that sellers think about outcomes versus feature function and product.
So that's a great opening part, talking about position messaging. I think it's ultimately really important, particularly as we go into 2026. And every leader's probably been going through their sales kickoff, and there's numbers and targets to be achieved. Another really important part or fix to this is ICPs and focuses, and what you mentioned as well is your right to win. You've mentioned to me a few times is understanding your economic fire. Just explain to our audience what that means to you.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have a stakeholder map when you look at your ICP of, who's a user, who's a decision maker, who's an economic buyer. And you have to bring all of those folks together for really driving, building that champion that would allow you to move through the process the quickest. And so when I think about going into, we sell today to, chief compliance officers and risk officers and legal and operations team, it's how do we bring all of those folks together to understand the outcome or the problem we're trying to solve, not just does this thing do a certain feature or a function. So having an economic fire or economic buyer in the process is really, really important, because then you can start to put together the business impact analysis, right? What's the cost of indecision, right? And being able to quantify that with multiple types of variables really put the ownership of driving the sales process forward.
When you're going through this framework and you're having these conversations, tell me, what are the key indicators that you are looking for in this qualification?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a quantifiable ROI. There has to be a economic exposure to operational or financial risk. And in our business today, the software that we sell is basically helping companies be reputational guardians of their brand. And so when I think about stock price of these publicly held companies, if I think about, an audit finding, anything like that could really drive a very, very negative exposure financially and operationally to the company. So it's really understanding all of those attributes around that exposure that drives your messaging to how your company can help them achieve that outcome.
How are you monitoring if sales reps are picking up on these indicators during the qualification? Is this a training program that they go on? Is it software picking up on keywords?
Yeah, it is. It's a multitude of things, James, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So one of the things that I did when I came in was installed a learning tool, learning path tool for our sales teams. I wanted to make sure that I was able to create a consistent certification of the message versus having 25 people go out and talk to clients 25 different ways. And so that coordination across the group really tightened our messages, really had us talk less about my company, but more about the client and putting ourselves in the client's understanding of the business outcome they were trying to solve. The other thing that we did is that we packaged consistent enablement for the sales team. So we have a weekly enablement series where we talk about a variety of topics, whether it's objection handling, whether it's product enhancements, all the things that will help us tell the broader vision and story. Because James, these decisions are not made for 2 and 3 year cycles. They're made for 10 and 20 years. I want to give them a 10 and 20 year vision on where the company's going and how we're going to solve for those different types of growth vectors that they're worried about in their business.
Tell me about this technology that you brought in. What was your reason behind bringing that technology in? Had you come in and done some, I know, like the first 30, 60, 90 days of a new sales leader, there's a review of everything that's going on. Did you do a review, find a gap, and then want to bring that technology on?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's just like, look, we all are talking AI, probably too much at this point, but a lot of tools were in the marketplace that I think were a little bit static. And I wanted to go out and look at how could I use and integrate into our CRM a way that would allow us some AI training and learning, some feedback, maybe some AI agent coaching, maybe some deal room specific stuff. So salespeople could see themselves present to a customer. They could get feedback live and post notes that, basically what is AI telling them, what they did well, what they didn't do well. And I will tell you, it was pretty uncomfortable for the first, 90 days as people started to do 3 and 5 minute pitches into this tool. And then it spits back, hey, you shouldn't say, you said filler words way too much. And it really started to make people have much more self-aware on being very crisp and very solution and value oriented versus basically just talking and using that mouth out of proportion to listening.
I have to say, when I first started doing the podcast, I didn't realize how much I said until I was going back through editing, and it was like removed 345 times. It's a lot. Yeah. One of the key things that a CRO needs to do is understand when you're chasing the wrong ICP, Firstly, how does a CRO work out that the focus area is in the wrong place? And what are they looking for? What's the key indications, and how quickly should they pick that up?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of the most important things, I think. And I'll just give you kind of my playbook as I think about like go to market first 90 days, right? I think that in the first 90 days, I kind of stay away from touching headcount, comp plans, or tooling. I'd focus on diagnosing three things: ICP clarity, deal level win-loss patterns, and what top reps do differently. And most go-to-market problems are upstream: their positioning, their qualification, their sales motion. They're not really downstream execution. The mistake leaders make is scaling chaos, right? And that's real important. And you fix the story and target, then you worry about scale. And when you talk about ICP, I mean, one of the things I've done in my last two companies was basically immediately partner with sales and RevOps and look at that ICP. And what I found was that it was a little loose. It wasn't updated. It wasn't refreshed. And you should really look at your ICP, every 12 months to 18 months at a minimum, and think about the attributions to making sure you're selling to the right customers where you have the best and fastest way to win, and refresh that occasionally. We actually go through a targeting and segmentation process every year where we take people out of our ICP. It really keeps the target and opportunity list very, very fresh for our reps. And every year they have something to go pursue. And we call it new dirt.
The first bit that you mentioned there was what you did when you first arrived and the analysis and the time you spent doing that. I think it's really important that I want to touch on this is that you didn't mention new logo wins and looking to drive revenue. I think it's a common mistake sales leaders going into a new business. They want to prove themselves and they want to move revenue forwards. You didn't mention that at all. So I just want to kind of peel that back a little bit. Why do you do what you did? Because I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, because it obviously enabled you to move forward in the right paths. And how did you position that with your employers that you were going to have that time to review, have a look, and build back the right practice to move the business forwards?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, in both scenarios, and my experience is that we had basically a roster of sellers and they were selling new logo and existing customers. But what happens in that situation is the easier path to sales is through an existing customer. And if you have more products to sell that existing customer, that's where a relationship and integrity and trust are already created. The harder part is the new logo piece. So not every new logo is wired and DNA'd the same way as someone that's selling to an existing customer. So in both scenarios, I basically said, we need to bifurcate the focus and drive a new logo segmentation as well as a existing expansion business. And we did that in both companies. And we created a really healthy business mix where we weren't over dependent or overexposed on one revenue versus the other, but got them where we were kind of equal. So you can drive the revenue engine and the revenue growth, which is new logo, that ultimately hands over new logos every year to that existing customer team to spend all of their time expanding and driving that net retention. So new logo growth, in my opinion, James, and this is kind of an ugly way to say it, but I'll say it. If you're not growing, you're dying, and growth comes at the top of the funnel in the conversion of those new logos.
But it's important that you spend that first couple of months doing the analysis, looking at what's gone on, how things done before. How did you understand how much time you had from the board to do that and make the analysis and make the decisions to make the changes that you did?
Yeah, well, every private equity company has a different way they operate and the different relationship that they have with their CROs. And I've been very, very fortunate in my private equity experience to have a very patient board to basically listen to, their investment thesis and what they believe is the right areas of priorities, talking through that and basically saying, hey, this is what I think we need to do based upon all the data that I have. I would say that these roles are quite, the patience level is not a year. It really needs to provide impact in that first 90 days. So my focus is focusing on quick wins where I can drive a immediate low-hanging fruit kind of impact immediately, build that trust. And in the next 90 days, you do something else and you get those things off the list. So after that first year, you have multiple sets of wins in a way that allows you to create the budget, create the strategy that you need in that subsequent growth year.
And before we move on to sales enablement and just putting you on the spot, because this wasn't part of the script, in that analysis that you did, because I do think it's a critical part and it's a critical time for sales leaders, that first quarter. Through that deep analysis that you did, surveying everything that the business was doing, was there any key thing that came up that was important to, if you would say, look, by doing it, this one thing came up which changed or altered what I was planning to do?
Yeah, I would say, James, that most sales enablement fails primarily because it focuses on content instead of behavior. And more decks don't change performance, repetition and coaching do. So not only, getting the enablement right, it's also that mentoring and coaching, which kind of goes back to that weekly sales enablement series that I talked about. But enablement should really be tied to one metric at a time, like win rate or like against a competitor or a discovery conversion. But if enablement can't clearly explain what reps will do differently in their next call, it's just noise and it's just an activity. So the goal isn't knowledge, it's consistent execution and repeatability.
We're going to talk now about sales methodology. And the most important part to me is execution, because I see it time and time again. People understand the playbook, they understand what to do. But when it comes to doing it day in, day out, that's where the biggest challenge is. Before we dive into that, we're going to talk about SPICED. Could you just give our viewers, our audience, an idea of what SPICED is, why you chose SPICE?
Yeah. So I've been through Challenger, I've been through Medic, I've been through MedPick, I've been through SPICED. And I like SPICED because when I came into my current situation, we had way too many sales stages, and we didn't have very clear or updated entry and exit criteria of moving those to the next stage. So we actually cut those in half because we focused on really driving what is the situation. So I'm going to spell spiced out. I'm going to give you kind of what that is. But situation is, do we understand the situation, right? This is all about what I said, why do anything? Why now? Why star, right? That's the whole situation. Do we understand them enough? Then you go into pain. Like, what do we know about their company that our solution could really drive a really meaningful impact, which is the next one, impact. That goes back to how we sell from an ROI perspective. That sells all about the discovery that we've learned, what we've heard, and how jobs to be done are things that we focus on versus feature function. Then it's critical event, right? What's the critical event? It's driving the urgency or why now, which could be a contract expiration. It could be they've had a breach with another provider. It could be that they have a cost containment in the organization. They're moving from a manual to a vended solution. So there's a whole bunch of things, but that really stack into a really nice sandwiched approach that allows us to really drive the focus on the entry and exit criteria so we can move through the funnel, which has resulted, James, in an unbelievable kind of benchmark for our business is converting 7% of our top of funnel when I got here to almost 47% of our funnel through advanced stages. So really, really important that you match the methodology with the sales cycle, with all the things that come with how do you get from one stage to the next and move it quickly through.
I think that's really important. So you mentioned at the start there that you've been through Challenger, Dick, and you're using SPICED here. How did you know that SPICED was the right methodology for here? What did you look at? And how did you make that decision from the data that came back?
Yeah, we really focused on kind of the buyer journey. And we really thought about the personas that make up those buyer journeys and how to map our stages to that. And so SPICED just fit the best because, a lot of our clients are either in one segment or asset class or they're in another, right? So we have like 22 subsectors in financial services and all of them have a different pain point. All of them have a different outcome they're trying to solve for, but very similar kind of themes throughout all of them. And so we really wanted to create the most consistent and repeatable methodology that would allow us to address that, put our campaign infrastructure behind it from a marketing standpoint, and then ultimately create that connected and community with all of those different segments in the business.
You mentioned you've got an incredible win rate now from the top of funnel, which shows it's working. You also spoke about taking the stages from 9 stages to 5 stages to doing a deal. Tell me, did you expect that, or did you look at it and go, 9 stages is far too long from your experience, and you knew you needed to get it down, or getting it down to 5 is just a byproduct of having an effective execution of a sales methodology?
Yeah, I think part of the latter part of what you said, but I think when I started to look at, a couple of stages in the middle of the funnel, it was really, really hard to figure out why are they there, right? And so I said, why don't we just beef up and become a little bit more detailed in what that exit criteria is. And maybe we can include some of those things that would be natural in a conversation or a meeting and include those in one, kind of stage versus having two. And we saw our age of our pipeline go quite a bit lower, almost 30% lower on the upper part of the market, which is primarily our ICP. So, productivity matters a lot, and we really needed to truncate our stages to be in a position where we could have more efficiency in our stages.
Some terrific results there. How long did it take for you to see those results? And how long did you have to just keep telling the reps to trust the process and to keep doing it? Because it wouldn't have been an overnight switch, would it? Unless you're telling me it was.
Yeah, I think we were doing a lot of things in those first 90 days and a whole lot more in the next 90 days. And, naturally, I'd love to say that, hey, we turned this whole thing around in 90 days. It took us a good 9 months to start to see the results, to start to see the win rates, to start to see the improvement across the board. And, we had a couple of new salespeople come into the process, which it takes a little bit of time to ramp those individuals. So once we had a 10 ramped team that were doing all of the same kind of positioning, enablement, and all the kinds of certifications that we were doing, we saw the efficiency really, really take off. And it not only ASP, so our order value went up, our sales cycles reduced across multiple segments of expansion and new logo, and our win rates went up to best-in-class SaaS numbers. So all of that work that we put in up front really came out on the backside.
6, we're going to be seeing leaders asked to do more revenue, higher targets, but with hiring less people. So what's the one change a company can make to materially improve the win rate without hiring any more people and without changing their pricing?
It comes down to targeting and segmentation. Do you have the focus on that right now? And do you have a refreshed view of that, right? Looking at your total relevant market, not just your TAM, your SAM, and your SOM, right? Those are 3 acronyms that I think get thrown out way too much. It really comes down to your total relevant market. Where have you the best right to win, the fastest and the highest? So focusing on that is really, really important. Tell you that the number of people I have in the sales organization today versus when I started is probably 15% less. And we've been able to do much more revenue because of it. And it really comes down to effective quota allocation models. It really comes down to that ICP focus and total relevant market. It really comes down to tighter positioning and messaging. And it really comes together when you have the right partnership with marketing to where you understand, based upon lining with product roadmap, campaign infrastructure to support that roadmap, and then a clear focus on the motions that you're going after. And that's just been something that 26 for us is going to be a new rally cry as we get even better with less and running the right efficiency in the organization. Really exciting.
We're going to segue into sales enablement now. It's a great topic. It's a topic I probably placed more sales enablement people in 2025 than I have done in my years of recruitment. The PE world are starting to really catch up on it, but it's still, I would say, in some businesses, not quite sure what or how it is. In your thoughts on sales enablement, how do you understand what is genuinely going to move the needle and what is just noise, busy work?
Yeah, great question. We live that at my current company. My first hire in the company was a sales enablement leader because we had to package everything we've talked about today. We had to package all of those things in a way that allowed us to be predictable in our growth. And what that now has expanded to is basically doing the same thing across customer success. It's doing the same things across marketing. It's doing the same things across professional services. Because when everyone in the organization understands that the North Star is growth, then you have an entire organization hitting and rowing at the same pace. And so our enablement leader is just a phenomenal human being. She understands where to drive the focus across the organization, and it's led to improved client connections. It's improved how we think about how to provide higher experiences. And the job has become almost so big that we need more people to actually support it, because everyone in the organization is really, really hungry for how are we doing this in sales so successfully, and how do we get the rest of the organization to do the same thing? So it's just really important that sales enablement doesn't become a sales thing. It is a sales first thing to get the sales team all consistent and predictable. And then it's how do you expand that across the organization and drive even more effectiveness on our growth strategy?
So you mentioned one of your first hires was this sales enablement person. Why?
Because I saw when I came in during my diagnose that we really had too many inconsistencies on positioning and messaging. We had 45 decks going out to, 10 different types of customers. And what I really wanted to do is understand why that happened and, how to bring that back together. And so when I started to lay out and learn more about the company and learn more about the market and learn more about how I could be effective quickly, I basically said the best thing we can do is narrow that approach, really tightening up our positioning and messaging, and really certifying our team so we have a very consistent way of pitching our solutions and the outcomes that we're trying to solve for our customers.
Yeah, I think when you got sales AEs all using different decks, it becomes super confusing. But what data were you looking for? What data was this sales and enablement person bringing to the table that you wanted to look at that was going to be super crucial to your decision making?
Well, I think any firm looking to hire a sales enablement leader, they have had to been there and done that before. These people use a lot of different tools. These folks use, a lot of different methodologies to drive some of that consistency. And I had worked with this person at a prior company, so I had a lot of familiarity with how she operates in general. And I think one of the things that's really important is when you bring in certain leaders underneath go-to-market is they learn how to anticipate and they learn how to think around the corner. I've been very blessed with my go-to-market team that they almost know the question I'm going to ask before I ask it, because I think setting those clear expectations up front, those clear OKRs and objectives are fully defined and they're fully visible to the rest of the organization so they can start to manage what needs to happen to fulfill on that strategy.
So how does sales enablement evolve in the role? Because I imagine there's lots to do in the beginning, but once it's all set up and it's done, how does the sales enablement person then provide a value to you, say after 6 months?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is that when I talked a little bit about how that sales enablement person is now extended into other functions and started to provide a lot of that content and how the experience from learning the tip of the spear, right, which is the client-facing folks, it's now becoming important that we onboard new joiners to our company that get some level of visibility to that process. And whether you're a support person or whether you're a PS person or whether you're a finance person or whoever you are in the organization, it's really important that they go through enablement to understand what it is we do as a company, right? Because if you're a support person and you've never been in our business, it's going to take you a long time to ramp on being effective at your role. How do we shorten that ramp time by saying, hey, here's our products. Here's how you need to certify yourself on it. Go learn the product and you become really, really, quickly an impact player in the organization if you're doing that from the day of joining the organization and onboarding versus waiting to learn it through your normal channels.
I think it's important that you share that insight, because I think they're critical people used in the right way with the right insight and given the opportunity, they can make a real impact on the business and allow the CROs to make decisions based on real life data and situations. One thing that will make a lot of sales leaders sit up and listen is that you grew revenue by about 30-40% with less reps than when you started. So walk me through how you did this without burning out your team.
Well, part of it is that every industry has a certain amount of prospects that come to market. right? And we've been very, blessed with the fact that we have great data. We have great historical data. We really have a strong tool that allows us to see historical trends in our business. And at the end of the day, when you look back over 3, 5, 7 years, you almost can predict what the next year will look like in terms of new people coming to market. And it will change every year based upon how big customers are coming to market versus how many little ones come to market. But at the end of the ability to manage that without big swings has allowed us to say, okay, we're going to think about our tiers a different way, right? We're going to think about like the upper end of the market is going to be covered by this segment of salespeople in the organization. We're going to have a mid-market team that's going to focus on a wider ICP, and they're going to have ABX support. They're going to have SDR support. They're going to have all these kinds of things. So we've really been able to measure this in a way that was not risky. And every once in a while, if we think about going into a new geography or something like that, we'll think about adding capacity. But we're really measured this way because I think, having good win rates, having good ASP, and ensuring that you're continuing on that journey allows you to really drive your bookings growth in a very predictable way.
It's all really, really great stuff for people to listen to. And I'll say when you're converting more of the top of your funnel and you're moving the stages from 9 down to 5, you're freeing your reps up for more time to do more selling, which makes absolute sense. Before I let you go, a bit of fun. We're going to look at the 90-day reset. If you took over a GTM, a struggling B2B company, what's the first 90-day GTM reset you'd run? And what would you deliberately not touch?
Yeah. Well, I told you originally, unless it comes with some, well-known, this person is, not effective, et cetera, I really, really focus on data. Rev ops and sales ops and marketing ops. It's really important to understand what is the data telling the company. So I'd create kind of a SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, low-hanging fruit opportunities, and then long-term value levers that might require an investment, right? And I build that SWOT analysis out on one page into multiple GTM findings and levers that I would want to pull over a sequence of calendar that drives the highest impact. And it's a little bit of a playbook that I have. I've used it, I've had it for about 10 years. And all it requires is a little bit of tweaking to be able to do the types of things that will allow immediate impact to be felt and the outcome to address largely a CEO's, pain points.
So your background is as a consultant. You talk a lot about data, and it's clear you understand data. Do you feel having that background as a consultant, where you'd have been looking at numbers and data all day long, over some sales leaders which have come through as rockstar salespeople, and it's just about getting the deal done and trying to get it over the line?
I think you have to first define what a chief revenue officer is and what a chief revenue officer isn't. And I would say that, I have talked to firms that are looking for a chief sales officer, right? Where the remit might be new logo only, or maybe I'm focusing on the expansion business, but there's no coordination between marketing. There's no coordination between product. And that really is, in my opinion, depending on the size of a company, a very, very super sales manager, where you are really driving a lot of the execution piece of getting involved. You may want to call it super repping, but it's almost like somewhere in between first line and second line sales management. A chief revenue officer is largely a revenue architect, right? So they are the revenue engine of a company, where they are pulling all of those separate functions together to drive the operational flywheel to drive predictable growth. And not a lot of companies understand that. A lot of companies are looking for the sales hero, the magic bullet. And, what I try to tell people is like, look, there is some things you have to do to set the company up to actually drive these things, which goes back to my SWOT. But it's really, really important that based upon where you are in that journey, whether you're a $10 million company, 40, 70, 150, there's different remits that a CRO or CSO would actually do to drive that predictability. So I really, really like working with companies that understand the go-to-market operating system, not a sales and marketing function, but everything is an operating system, and how you pull that together And it comes with data. It's being able to look at data and starting to see, where the leakage is, where the drift is, and all those kinds of things, and focusing on those priorities.
I think that's an important part. And I think, summing up what a CRO's role is there, I think is an important part. How important, though, was the consultative journey for you, which meant once you saw the data, you understood the data, that you could talk to the various different teams about the data and how you're going to improve and move things forward? Because that's also a really critical part in how you explain things to people.
Well, it's a great call out. I was very lucky early in my career to work primarily in the C-suite and build relationships with some big customers and big industries. And what I learned is that the C-suite and the senior levels of those C-suites, don't make decisions on ideas. They make decisions on data. And at the end of the day, that's how I spent 10 years of my career, is pulling together facts, pulling together data and seeing what the data told us that would allow us to formulate an outcome for the customer to address either top line or bottom line. So to me, it just was kind of ingrained in me early in my career. Here's what you're going to do. Here's how you're going to do it. And I've taken that into kind of how I've led go-to-market teams in my software and private equity experience.
Well, Craig, look, this has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. The topics that you chose kind of shows the leader that you are, the success that you've had, and the building blocks behind what you've done and how you've gone about it and delivered some amazing results. So thank you so much for agreeing to take time out from your day and share that with us.
Absolutely, James. I've had a great time, and hope you have a great weekend.